In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, amen. So a few weeks ago, we began a series on comparative theology. And for those of you guys who were here, our brother Amir Rashidi, he actually began to speak to us about the differences between the Oriental Orthodox Church, the Coptic Church specifically, and the Catholic Church. We had a very good discussion in regards to the differences between us, but also the hope that we have in reconciliation towards one another. And obviously in that discussion, we also talked about some of the things that we have to settle before we can hope to see further communion between the both of us. So today we're going to continue this conversation, but we're going to have it specifically in regards to what is our understanding between the differences that exist with the Oriental Orthodox Church. So whenever I say Oriental Orthodox, I'm obviously speaking of the Coptic Orthodox Church and all of the churches who are there with her, versus the Eastern Orthodox Church. So the Greeks, the Russians, the Romanians, the Ukrainians, and so on and so forth. Okay? So you have to understand that I tried preparing this topic specifically within the same realities and the same comparisons that Amir did, where he talked about dogmatic differences and so on and so forth. And I realized it's very difficult to do. It's very difficult to do because in reality today we really have no problems between us. But we have to talk about the history. And the history, unfortunately, is one that's really ugly. So allow me today to dirty your ears, as they say. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of the stuff that we've seen in history, and how sometimes our humanity and our brokenness gets in the way of what is best for the church. And I'm going to talk to you about a very ugly period in the church, where people were really trying to one-up each other, and unfortunately things got in the mix, and next thing you know we have a schism. So I'm going to talk to you about, obviously, I'm biased, I'm going to talk to you about the Coptic Orthodox Church's perspective on what happened in history, right? Now you should know that the conversation I'm going to have with you guys today is it's total plagiarizing, okay? So I'm not giving you anything from myself. I've based all of this based on a book called Chalced and Re-Examined by Deacon V.C. Samuel from the Malankara Orthodox Church, as well as this wonderful sermon that was given by Father Anthony Paul a few years back in the United States. So here's what I need you to understand, okay? We have to go back a little bit further to understand what's going on. In the first couple of centuries of the church was very focused on what? Survival. Because the church was persecuted. Nobody spoke in terms of the Church of Rome, the Church of Alexandria, the Coptic, the Orthodox Church, the Greek Orthodox Church. Nobody was speaking in these terms. You were Christian or you were not Christian. Everybody was one. There was no schisms. And so because of this, if you were a Christian and you identified as a Christian, regardless of your ethnicity and where you came from, you had a target on your forehead. The church was undergoing persecution. And all of this went on until about the year 313, because in 313, God sends a righteous emperor by the name of Constantine. And in 313, he comes out with an edict that allows Christians to be able to worship freely. And then a little bit later on, he doesn't just say Christians are allowed to worship, he actually makes Christianity the actual religion of the land. So we go from being persecuted for our faith to having total liberty, total freedom. That you can now worship any which way you want, and that you have now the right to be able to express yourself as a Christian, to build churches, to preach the gospel, to do all of these things. So what happens in this transition? And this is important. The church goes from survival and looking over its shoulder to suddenly having the freedom to be able to express itself any which way it wants. And in that expression came a time where the church wanted to express its faith. And whenever we try to put our faith in words, what are we talking about? We're talking about theology. So when we begin to theologize, to speak about God and how we understand God, and now everybody is doing this, and people are doing it in Alexandria, in Jerusalem, in Antioch, in Rome, everybody's speaking about the same God, but suddenly the church starts to pick up on the fact that people are speaking differently. People are not saying the same things. So now the church is facing something new. Because we are teaching and we are theologizing, now we have to have a standard. You can't just say what you want whenever you want. And because we have this freedom, we now have to correct people who are making mistakes. And if people refuse to correct their mistakes, then we have to call them out for their heresies. Does anybody know what the word heresy means? You've heard of the word, I'm sure. But what does the word heresy actually mean? Heretikon actually comes from the idea of picking out from the group. So you've taken one idea outside of its context and you've made it your standard. You've made it your label. So a heresy begins when the person begins to take things outside of their natural context. When he views them independently and outside of the frame of the universal church. So we begin to identify heresies. And in the process, to address these heresies, the church begins to introduce this idea of councils. So what happens? Throughout all of this, and while it's happening, there's 4 major cities that begin to rise to the podium as sort of like the hubs of Christianity. So they are Rome, Alexandria, Antioch, and Jerusalem. But when Constantine enters into the scene, Constantine wants to leave his mark on the world. So he establishes a city after his own name. Does anybody know what the name of that city is? Constantinople. So Constantinople only shows up in the 4th century. It wasn't actually a big deal in the Christian reality until the 4th century. And then finally, Constantinople starts to identify itself as the 5th see. And this is what we call the Pentarchy, the 5 major sees. When I say see here, I'm not talking about S-E-A, I'm talking about S-E-E. It's the seat of Christianity. So you have Rome, Alexandria, Jerusalem, Antioch, and Constantinople. So what naturally happens? When you start having these hubs, and you start having these 5 churches in different areas who express themselves very differently, but they express the same faith, this forces us to have what we call a primacy. What is this primacy? It's this idea of identifying one among the 5 who's almost going to take the lead for us. Okay? And the church unanimously agrees that this church that should be the first among equals is the Church of Rome. And so they identify that the Church of Rome is first among equals. Now let me clarify, because this is obviously a point of contention between us and our brothers, the Catholics. When we speak about the first among equals, this literally means we're all on the same horizon. It's not a hierarchy where Rome is above everyone else. Everyone is on the same horizon. But when the older brother is there, we allow him to lead. And the older brother is Rome in this case. So Rome was identified as the first among equals. Why is this important? Because I need you to understand this is crucial, because when we get into the politics of the heated debates and the drama that's about to break out, you'll understand why this is important. Rome was now identified as what? Sort of like the court of appeals. Does anybody here study law? Nobody here studies law? This is wonderful. One person? You study law? What's a court of appeals? If you had to describe what a court of appeals is.
It's where you, it's like where you, say, you appeal, a decision of the court where you don't agree with the decision. So you, appeal to a higher authority, so, you go to a court of appeal, and then you go through the court of appeal to see if it's worth going up.
Perfect. So there's already a decision that's being made, but we don't agree to this decision. There's people who are in conflict. So we go to one step higher, we go to a court of appeals who's supposed to be able to decide among us. Okay? Almost like a person who's going to make the final call. And we gave that right out of honor to the Church of Rome. Now remember, this is important. But what ends up happening? In the first 4 centuries, the Church of Alexandria starts to take up a lot of place. And when I say a lot of place, I'm talking about like you know how you have that one friend who they're not even part of the conversation, but as soon as they open their mouth, they hog the spotlight? Well, Alexandria is that annoying friend. Okay? Why? Because Alexandria becomes the hub of monasticism. You have Anthony the Great. You have Pachomius, who introduces the Cenobitic monasticism. You have the school of Alexandria. You have Clement of Rome. You have Origen. You have Athanasius. You have these great pillars who are appearing, and this school is producing theologians we're pumping them out. So Alexandria is taking a lot of place. And while we're pumping them out, we begin to become a city or become a country that has several bishops. It's no longer just one bishop in Alexandria. No, Egypt fills with bishop. And we introduce a term. It's funny because everybody thinks that the term I'm about to tell you began in Rome. No, it began in Alexandria. And that word is pope. The first time the word pope was ever used was in Alexandria. How did we use it? We used to call the patriarch of Alexandria Papa, Abba, whoever it was. What does Papa, Abba mean? Papa, Abba is actually the same 2 words back to back. It's father, father. Okay? But Papa, Abba literally just means what? The dad of dads. The father of fathers. So among his brothers, the bishops, the patriarch of Alexandria was called Papa, Abba. And this is why until today, what do we say in hymnology? Papa, Abba, Tawadros. We still say it until today. So while people are blaming Rome for you guys created this Pope, no, Alexandria is the one who created all of this mess, okay? But we always meant it as what? The first among equals, not a hierarchy. Again, why is this important? Because while everyone agrees Rome is the first among equals, Alexandria is taking a lot of place. Now, in Alexandria, we spoke about how it is that there's a school that emerges, right? We have the School of Alexandria. Now, this school takes up a lot of place, and it's pumping out theologians. But not too far away from Alexandria is Syria, and you have a city called Antioch. So Antioch also has a school. So now you have these two rival schools, if you wish. Almost like Harvard and Princeton, right? They fight for who's more elite, right? Is that comparable? Is Princeton a good university? Yale? Yale. Let's go with Yale. Okay? So you end up having this rivalry of which is the better school. Okay? And here's what's really interesting. While both schools are using the Greek language, because by the way, a lot of people think that back in the day, Egypt used to speak Coptic. No, we never spoke Coptic. Greek was the language of the empire, right? Coptic was more a liturgical language. Some people used to write it, but in reality, like the lingo of the streets, what people spoke almost everywhere, it was Greek. That was the language of the empire, okay? But the problem is that, you know how in English, the English is a universal language. But there's some terminology, when you use it here in North America, it means something very different if you take it to Britain, right? One word here could be a compliment, while if you use it over there, it's a complete insult, okay? Over there, it's a noun, you use it here, you've insulted my family, okay? But it's the same word and it's the same language. This starts to develop. Why is this important? Because now everybody is using the same language, but the terminology means different things to different people out of these two schools. And this is going to make a lot of sense when I bring you to the drama. All of this, I'm just preparing you for what I'm about to introduce to you. So the church is growing, it's growing, it's growing, and then eventually it ends up meeting these conflicts. And when they meet these conflicts, they try to solve things diplomatically. When they can't solve them diplomatically, they say, okay, this is no longer just a problem of the church. This involves everyone in the empire. Mr. Emperor, sir, we need a council. And he forces all the bishops to get together, and they have these what we call ecumenical councils. And these ecumenical councils are no longer just local. If the problem was with a priest in Egypt, like Arius, right? If Egypt tried to solve it, and Arius continued doing what he's doing outside of Egypt, they would tell the emperor, we have a bigger problem on our hands, and he calls for a council. The first council was the Council of Nicaea, where they dealt with Arius. We're not going to get into that detail. The second council was in Constantinople in 381, where they dealt with the issues against the Holy Spirit. The third council is a council that's important to us. This third council, you have this guy by the name of Nestorius. So let me just walk you through this because this is important, okay? So again, the hero of Nicaea, from Alexandria, takes up a lot of place. It was actually Bishop Alexander, and his right-hand man was a deacon by the name of Athanasius. So Athanasius becomes a hero, even though he's not even a priest or a bishop at the time, okay? But Alexander ends up representing all of Alexandria and the entire global church, and they defeat Arius. Arius doesn't really die down, the problems continue, and then eventually, not so long after, you have Constantinople, an issue by which they had to deal with people who were saying, okay, fine, we believe that the Son is equal to the Father, but this Holy Spirit thing is nonsense. He's nothing but an energy. He's not the third person of the Holy Trinity. They deal with it in Constantinople. What's the issue in Ephesus? In Ephesus, you have this new bishop who is ordained over the city of Constantinople. But he's originally from Antioch. So he is educated in the school of Antioch. And this guy is by the name of Nestorius. And he's a really nice guy. To be quite honest, I think he has a very bad rap. Unfortunately, he didn't express himself very well. And he stood up in front of a giant by the name of Cyril of Alexandria. And Cyril of Alexandria destroyed him. Destroyed him and destroyed his reputation. And I honestly feel a little bit bad for Nestorius. Okay? But the honest to God truth is that Nestorius stood up and he was really worried. He's like, guys, you can't say that the Holy Virgin Mother is called the Mother of God. You cannot call her Theotokos. And the reason you can't call her Theotokos, because it's nonsense to say that a woman gave birth to God. The word Theo literally means God, right? Theos. And Tokos is the word to bear, to carry. This is where we get the English word to take, to carry, to bring out of its place. Okay? Theotokos literally means just means the God bearer, the one who carries God. So today we just simply translate it as the mother of God, or in Arabic, walidat al-ilah. So this is what we're saying about her. And he's saying, you can't say that. You can't say that. Then why can't you say that? Because listen, like we agree. He's human and he's divine. She didn't carry the divinity. What do you mean God was in her womb? What do you mean God nursed at her breasts? What do you mean God cried as an infant and fell and had to learn to crawl and to walk? No. That was the human side. Right? But if you're going to talk to me about the miracles, yeah, that's the divinity. Yeah, he walked on water, it's the divinity. Yeah, he raised Lazarus from death, that's the divinity. So all of this began first as what people would seem to say as an insult to the mother of God. But Cyril didn't see it as the insult to the mother of God. Alexandria saw it as a direct insult to the person of Jesus Christ. While it might seem that we're talking about the Theotokos, she's not actually the subject at hand. The subject at hand is the one who she carries. Because unless he is perfectly God and perfectly human at the same time, then we have a serious issue. So when Nestorius was basically confronted by Cyril, there was an exchange between them, several letters, and in the end they couldn't agree. And Cyril basically said, well listen, unfortunately, you're standing against the Holy Church when you say these things, and you're wrong. They have the Council of Ephesus. Nestorius ends up being excommunicated. But I just want to tell you, to give you a glimpse of how drama really picks up really quick. Nestorius has a really good friend who happens to be the emperor. Okay? He has another really good friend who is the bishop of Antioch. And remember how I told you Antioch in Alexandria? There's something there, right? So the bishop of Antioch, whose name is John, he tells Nestorius, don't go to the council right away. Let's let them brew. Hold on, okay? We'll show up together. Cyril says, with or without them, we have his writings, we're going to make a decision. So before the dude even shows up to the council, Cyril manages to get everyone to say this is heretic. They excommunicate him, okay? So Nestorius shows up with John late, and they told him, you're late, it's over, we decided, he's out. Okay? John loses his mind. How can you do this? Alexandria is not the powerhouse. They can't do whatever they want. This guy Cyril is a bully. Fine. If he's going to do that, we're going to have our own meeting. So John holds a council with another group of bishops, and they excommunicate Cyril. Okay? Forgive me, I'm going to turn this into a mockery because it really is sad that these things happen in history, but it's important. Who hears about this and can't handle it? Like you guys are acting like children, and I can't, this is ridiculous. I have an empire to run. The emperor. So what does the emperor do? He arrests both of them. He arrests John. He sends Nestorius into exile because khalas. What's worse is that where do they send Nestorius for him to be exiled? They send him to Egypt. So the poor guy is... Nestorius is sent to Egypt. John of Antioch is arrested, Cyril of Alexandria is arrested, and then they're basically told, make up and make nice. Enough. Right? So they go back and forth, back and forth. John of Antioch finally admits, listen, Nestorius went overboard. Clearly he can't say that. He has to be perfectly God and perfectly man. We believe that he has both natures. We can't say anything other than that. So we agree, but we're not using the same terminology. I don't agree to the way you formulate it. So him and Cyril basically come up with this formula, or this letter of reconciliation, where they say, listen, we're expressing it differently, but we agree that this is what's important. We agree on the baseline, okay? We agree on the fact that this is what has to be found for us to be saved. We agree on the essentials. So even though we're using different terminology, again, Alexandrian language, Antiochian language, but that's fine. Use the language you wish, but as long as we agree on the foundation. And they write this letter of reconciliation, and then Cyril continues to live for about a decade, almost 15 years, and then finally, Cyril passes away in 444. Who takes his place? One of our great saints by the name of Pope Dioscorus. And he becomes the 25th Pope of Alexandria. So, everything is going great, everyone is happy, until this one guy comes up. And now we're going to get into the drama of what led to the separation, okay? This guy by the name of Eutychus. Now Eutychus, he's not a priest. He happens to be a monk. He's an arch-minidrite. He's like the abbot of a monastery. Okay? And he hears that the bishop of Constantinople, whose name is Flavian, is using language where he talks about humanity, divinity, and to him this sounds like, hey, like the guy before him, Nestorius, also spoke about two, and I don't think that sounds right, and he calls him a heretic. Okay? He calls him a heretic, and this really bothers Flavian. Flavian is the bishop of Constantinople, like you can't just like point to the bishop and say you're a heretic, right? Big deal, they put him on trial. What do you mean? What is it that I said that I was heretic? I'm saying the same thing as Cyril, and Eutychus is saying, no, I'm the one who's saying the same thing as Cyril. Okay? And they're going back and forth, until finally they decide what? Eutychus, this isn't making sense. Now Eutychus, just in his defense, dude doesn't know how to speak. Like seriously. Okay? He has major issues, and unfortunately he is not a theologian. The poor guy doesn't help himself, because you'll say, do you believe in this, this, and this? And he's like, I don't know. Well, what do you believe in? I believe in what Cyril said. Okay, tell us what you think Cyril said. No, I don't know. He's not helped, but you called me a heretic, so you must know what he said. And in the way he explains it, he starts saying, yeah, there's two, but divinity swallowed up humanity. And he almost compares it to what? You take a cube of sugar, you drop it in the hot water, you mix. What happens to the sugar? It dissolves into the water. He goes, that's sort of what happened. They're both there. And so the people start to react, and they say, no, now he's neither human nor divine. He's this new thing. He's this mix of a thing. Now you've just ruined him even more. He is both, and we don't understand how you can't say he became this third thing. Because now it literally sounds like God the Son, the Word, has changed. And God forbid that you could say that God is changeable, that he is mutable. So they say, Eutychus, you're excommunicated. Eutychus goes to his friend. Everybody's the friend of the emperor, by the way. He goes to the emperor. He goes to Theodosius. He tells him, your bishop of Constantinople excommunicated me when there's nothing wrong with me. I believe in the faith of Cyril. And you're going to begin to realize that Eutychus he's sly, right? Because he'll put his foot in his mouth, and then he'll say, I never said that. And then when he's told, take your foot out of your mouth and speak properly, he doesn't know what to say. Okay? So he goes to the emperor and he says, I have this issue. So the emperor says, listen, like, the only way for us to figure out exactly if you're right or wrong, let's go to the people who know Cyril the best. Let's go to Egypt. Remember what I told you about Rome? What did I say Rome was comparable to? The court of? The court of appeals. The place that you go to when you want to overrule or you want to examine a decision. Who does the emperor go to? He doesn't go to Rome. He goes to Dioscorus. He goes to Egypt. So in the background, who's pissed off? Rome is pissed off. Rome is pissed off. But Dioscorus is like, of course, yeah, sure, I'll do this, right? Okay, let's gather a group of bishops. Juvenile, the bishop of Jerusalem, why don't you come and sit next to me and we'll co-chair this together. We'll both preside over this meeting. Yes, absolutely, they gather a meeting. They have this meeting called Ephesus II. This happens in 449. When they have this meeting, they sit down, Eutychus, they're like, listen, you're accused of being Nestorian, or you're accused of being monophysite. Monophysite is two words put together. Mono meaning one, and physite, which comes from the word physis, where you get physics, is the word nature. So you believe that Christ had one nature. This is a heresy. He goes, no, I believe in what Cyril and Athanasius said. Do you believe in what Cyril and Athanasius said? Yeah. You told this to Flavian, the bishop of Constantinople? Yeah. And he still excommunicated you? Yeah. Okay, you realize that Cyril said this, this, and this, and this. He goes, yeah, and that's what I believe. So now they have an issue.
That's what I thought.
Exactly. So he holds this council. He tries to figure out what's going on with Eutychus. Eutychus is like a slippery snake. He can't figure out what he's saying. And in the end, the bishops who are there, not just Dioscorus, the bishops who are there, all sign and say, we question the dude. His faith is right. So now we have a problem. This is the court of appeals. So what happens? What happens when you go to the court and a guy who was found guilty is now found innocent? By default, what are you saying about the accusers? That they are the one who are in the wrong. So by default, what happens? If I exonerate Eutychus and say he's not a heretic, then the guy who called him a heretic must be wrong. Who called him a heretic? The Bishop of Constantinople. So they present this to the emperor. The emperor says, okay, done. Thank you for holding this meeting. And then they send people to go arrest Flavian, the Bishop of Constantinople, for falsely accusing Eutychus and in the process identifying himself with a false theology. The guys who go arrest Flavian, they rough him up really bad. They rough him up so bad that they almost leave him dead. Okay? And the guy ends up dying from his wounds. So, we have Rome that's pissed off at Alexandria, right? We now have Constantinople who feels like Dioscorus single-handedly is the reason why their bishop died. And they're like, Constantinople is coming from a really bad place, right? Constantinople just lost Nestorius and they've already been deemed as heretics, the guys who had the patriarch who caused all of these issues with Cyril of Alexandria. Constantinople is already very volatile. What also happens at this council in 449? The bishops agree that there's these couple of guys, Theodosius, Theodoret, and Ibas of Edessa, that these three guys who are all from the school of Antioch, all of these guys are Nestorian. So all of them are excommunicated. So now we have Antioch that's like, oh, all we do is produce heretics. Constantinople is like, this guy won't stop picking on us. And Rome who's like, hey, I'm the big brother. Right? So people are really not happy with Alexandria. While all of this is happening, they go ahead and appeal to the emperor. And they tell him, listen, this whole court of appeals things is all wrong. We should have gotten Rome involved from the beginning. The Pope of Rome is called Leo. He writes a tome. He writes this letter, and he basically declares what the faith is, and he says he's human, he's divine, and in his language, all the churches read it, and they're like, okay, yeah, this is what we agree with. And if Cyril defended Eutychus, now keep in mind, what do they think Eutychus said? They think that Eutychus said that there is one nature, this messed up new nature, this mingled nature, right? And if Dioscorus accepted Eutychus, then Dioscorus must be Monophysite. Do you guys see it? If Mary tells me a lie, and she tells me Abuna 5 plus 5 is 18, okay? And Eric goes to correct her, okay? He tells her, no, Habibti 5 plus 5 is 10. And then she comes back and tells you, I told Abuna Anthony and he agrees. What do you now think I believe? That 5 plus 5 is 18. Right? What she didn't tell you is that no, like she told me that 5 plus 5 is 10, and like she believes in the math table and all these things work out. Right? So they have a council. And now it's not just a local council in Ephesus, they call for the Fourth Ecumenical Council in Chalcedon, 451. Now, why is this important? Because you're going to begin to realize very quickly that this has a lot more to do with power and politics than it does with theology. And this is where it gets really unfortunate. They call for a council, and everyone is heavily politically charged. Like we said, the emperor, this is another aspect, sorry. The emperor has his own agenda. The emperor, by the way, everyone thinks the emperor is like this good Christian. The emperor couldn't care less. He's a politician. He's running an empire. He wants everybody to be okay, because if everyone is okay, there's less turmoil, there's a lot less chaos, the economy flourishes, everyone is happy, I collect taxes, everything is going well. But he wants to make a name for himself. So he wants to make Constantinople the new Rome. I want people to forget about Rome, and I want to move the empire to Constantinople. I want the Byzantine Empire to take over. And not only that, I want to go down in history as the guy who saved the Christian faith. So I want a new creed. You guys have the creed already, and you're still fighting. I want us to write something new. So he's playing everyone against each other. And that's the truth of the matter. Okay? Rome wants its primacy back. Constantinople wants to regain its honor. Antioch wants to defend its school. And they're claiming that this is all under the discussion of what we call Christology. All of this has to do with we're not talking about Christ in the same way. One nature, two natures, divinity, humanity. So the claim in Ephesus the second, which we call a council that was valid, obviously we say it because like Dioscorus is our guy. Okay? The rest of the church calls it the council of robbers. Why? because that's where truth was robbed of its honor. That in this council, they just basically want to do away with Constantinople and Rome, and Alexandria wanted to shine. Okay? Whereas we actually have historical minutes where it's Theodosius who asks Alexandria to intervene. Right off the bat, when the council begins, they treat Dioscorus as a criminal. He is not seated with the bishops. He's seated at the forefront as if he was put on trial. And he goes, last I checked. And by the way, if you want, there's about 600-page book called The Minutes of Chalcedon. Okay? It's shocking. It's shocking. You won't believe the stuff. The guy who wrote it, the guy who was present at the time and who took the minutes, he went into great detail as to this bishop said this, and this bishop intervened, and this guy cut him off, and everything is written down. And it's crazy. It's crazy. It's like the typical Egyptian gathering. Right? Everything is chaotic. Khalas? But it's unbelievable how when you're reading this, you can't believe that this actually happened in history. Dioscorus is sitting there, he goes, last I checked, the decision of that council was signed by a group of bishops. I wasn't there alone. So if I'm going to be put on trial, everyone who signed should be sitting here at the forefront with me. And then people start to say, what? No. You forced us to sign. He says, what? He says, yeah. You had the Roman guards come up to us and force us at the threat of death to sign empty paperwork. You filled it in afterwards. Now, while they're saying this story, and then you got the guy to do this, and then you forced us to do this, and that's when we signed, and I showed up late, and I signed under this guy, and they start contradicting each other, and the guy who's hosting the meeting basically catches them in the act, and then by the end of the council, people are saying, okay, so he didn't really force us. Okay? This is in the minutes, which is shocking, right? Because you're like these are bishops? This stuff is happening, okay? And he goes, fine, all of you don't want to be put on trial with me, that's fine. At least Juvenile, the bishop of Jerusalem, who co-chaired with me, who was also the presider, put him on trial with me. And they're like, no, it's you. So they pinpoint him out, and for about several days, they torch him, right? They try to basically find out anything that's heretical, and everything he says is exactly the same dogma as Cyril of Alexandria. So if you want to attack Dioscorus in his faith, you're attacking Cyril, the same one that you said is the pillar of the faith because he defended against Nestorius. So they're trying to catch him in the act for the faith, and they can't. Unfortunately, at some point in the conversation, one of the bishops who's questioning him references the tome of Leo. This is Pope Leo of Rome. He talks about the one Lord Jesus Christ in two natures. In two natures. And Dioscorus says, it's not in two natures, it's of two natures. Now, all of you are sitting here and you might be thinking to yourself, what's the difference? You remember how we talked about the language between Antioch and Egypt was different? Well, the difference is actually very, very important. Because in these little words, he thinks they're Nestorian, and they think he's Monophysite. How? If we say he is in two natures, we're saying that you have the body of Christ, the person of Christ, and he's divided right down the middle. In two natures is divinity goes here, humanity goes here, and they'll figure it out. They cohabitate in this body, right? Which now creates a schizophrenic dilemma, where sometimes he's divine, sometimes he's human. And this is exactly what Nestorius said. So when they're talking, the only thing Dioscorus is hearing is what? You guys are Nestorian. You're worse than Eutychus. And when he's clarifying, he's saying he's of two natures. What do you mean? He's perfectly divine, he's perfectly human, but he's one person. These pour into this one person. These two are found in this one person. So his emphasis is on the one. Their emphasis is on but there's two natures. So they think he's monophysite. And he thinks that they're all Nestorian. Where does all of this come from? Forgive me, this is going to get really technical for about 30 seconds, okay? There's 4 words that are really important to this conversation. Prosopon, physis, ouseia, and hypostasis. Prosopon is a word that talks about the face of a man, right? So for instance, I know that Amir is Amir when I recognize his characteristics. When I look at him, I know that he looks a certain way. If he were to put on a mask, I wouldn't be able to identify him. So prosopon is how I identify the person. Okay? Physis is where you get the word physics, which is nature. But here's the problem. In Alexandria, when we speak of this word, okay, we understand it more at the level of a person's nature is who he is, his identity, his hypostasis, his person. But in the language of Antioch, they understand it as no, physis is nothing more than usayya, his essence, what he's made of. So when they're talking about one physis or two physis, monophysite or diaphysite, one of them is understanding like, hold on, so you're saying he's two people? You're crazy. And they're saying, no, of course he's two. But they're talking about what? Natures. This is where the language got the best of us. And this is where, unfortunately, they couldn't agree. But at the same time, because he's quoting Cyril, he's using the Greek words that Cyril used, they can't hold him as a heretic. So they do something really sneaky. And the churches who all want to plot against Dioscorus and Alexandria and the movement and who have a whole bunch of things to gain, they have a secret meeting outside of the council. And they have a secret meeting where they're like, listen, we need to get rid of this guy. He's causing too much problems. He's causing an uproar. He's the guy who killed Flavian. This is bad for the church. We need to get rid of him. So they have a secret meeting and they call Dioscorus to come. Now, here's this interesting rule. There's a rule that exists within the administrative rules of the council where if you are summoned to come to a meeting 3 times and you refuse, you are excommunicated. You are deposed. So they tell Dioscorus, come attend this secret meeting. First time he says, I'm not feeling well. They invite him a second time. He goes, fine, I'll come, but make sure Juvenile is there. They refuse, so he doesn't show up. They invite him a third time, come. And he goes, listen, it's pretty clear that you're going to do whatever the hell you want anyways. Okay? So what you're going to do, go ahead and do. This is a waste of everyone's time. So because he doesn't show up after 3 summons, he is deposed. So now Dioscorus is officially deposed. Now, I want you to understand that I'm going to use the word excommunicated very lightly because people think that when you are excommunicated, that means that you are a heretic. That's actually not true. The church uses 2 different words, excommunicated and anathema. Anathematized means you're a heretic, we have nothing to do with you. Excommunicated means you are outside of communion. You are excommunicated. You are outside of communion. So they take away his priesthood, they throw him in the city called Gangra, they beat him up really bad. He takes and he sends to his children in Alexandria the hair that they pulled out of his beard. They literally stripped him of his beard. You have to understand that at that time, like you know how today we just think this is just Arab influence? No, this goes all the way back to the early church fathers. The beard was the identification of a man that was worthy of honor. The beard is like, you know how when you look at a lion, the male lion has a what? He has a mane. If you strip him of his mane, you can't tell the difference between him and the female lion, right? Augustine actually talks about this whole idea of how the beard of the priest or the bishop is his mane. So when they strip him of his beard, they are completely dishonoring his priesthood. They basically beat him up and he sends his teeth and his hair of his beard to his children. He says, this is the fruit of my faith. Okay? The people who excommunicate him and who depose him go back to the council. And by the way, when we talk about a council, everyone thinks it's like a really long 8-hour meeting. No, it's more like a 3-week meeting. Okay? Some of these meetings for Nicaea was 3 months long. So they go back to the council and they go, yeah, some of us met and we tried to summon him and he didn't show up, so Dioscorus is no longer an issue, he's gone. People are shocked. They're like, what do you mean? Like, he's gone. He's deposed. He's out. So we got to make a few decisions. We're going to go ahead and agree on the Tome of Leo. This is the faith of the church. All the Alexandrian bishops stand up, everyone who's from Egypt, and they say, we refuse to agree to anything or to sign anything if our father is not among us. If you will hold a secret meeting and depose him, then no. Alexandria will not have a voice in what it is that you are doing. Who walks out with them? 5 other churches. The Eritreans, the Ethiopians, the Armenians, the Malankara, and the Syrian church. All walk out with us. They're like, this is craziness. And for the first time in the history of the church, you have the losing team who says, we're not losers, you're the losers, we're walking out. We're doing our own thing. And now you have a schism. For the first time in the 5th century, in the year 451, we have this separation. Now here's the problem. Until today, now people might hear this and say, okay, but if we know all of this today, why can't we figure this out? Because unfortunately, until today, you speak to some people and they still think that the church is Monophysite, which is really shocking. However, we are not Monophysite. We definitely don't believe in Eutychus. By the way, Eutychus, literally after he was exonerated, he messed up again and he went to preach what he really believed. And Alexandria said, you're a heretic. So the guy who caused all of these problems, he put his foot in his mouth again and he was deemed a heretic. Khalas? So we are definitely not Monophysite. We do not believe that the nature of the divinity of Christ or the human nature of Christ somehow got mingled together, twinkled inside of each other, basically created this new crazy super being. No, he is perfectly God, he is perfectly man. We don't know how it works, but we know it to be true. And we insist that everything he does cannot be said, oh, that was his divinity, that was his humanity, because he is one person, he is not two. Example, in the Tome of Leo, he says something very interesting. He says, when he walked on water, it was his divinity. When he ate the food, it was humanity. When he cried over his friend, that was his humanity. When he raised him from the dead, that was his divinity. The Alexandrian response to that would be, that's wrong. Tell me, what walks on water? Humanity or divinity? Tell me.
Both.
Yes, both.
You need a physical part of you to walk on the water.
And
you need the divinity to be able to do that.
Why? Because divinity needs the feet, and the feet alone cannot walk on water. It cannot defy the laws of physics. He must be one. Or else, neither humanity nor divinity can do it. What about the raising of Lazarus? How did he raise him from the dead? Lazarus, come forth. Can a human being simply speak those words in his humanity and raise the dead? No. Does divinity have a voice? Does divinity have vocal cords? Does it speak a specific language? He must be both. This is where we emphasize things. Now today in this conversation, when we say this, by the way, again, sorry, just to clarify something, Dioscorus wasn't actually anathematized until, unfortunately, almost 230 years after his death. Okay? This council happens in 250 years after the council. In the 6th council that they have, by the way, when I say they, to us, the Chalcedonians are both the Catholics and the Eastern Orthodox, right? But why is this a bigger issue between us and the Easterns? Because the Catholics look at us and they're like, no, we're the same, we're good, right? Some of the Easterners really look at us with contempt, and this is an issue. And a lot of them really love us. Really love us. We're on phenomenal relationships with some, but there are others who think that we're the scum of the earth. Okay? And it's okay. We have the same thing on our side, by the way. We have some people who look at the Eastern Church as they're the ones who killed Dioscorus, right? And others who are like, no, these are we have the exact same faith and we're brothers in Christ. So he was only anathematized in the 3rd Council of Constantinople in 681. So because of this, what do we have today? Today what we have is the Eastern Orthodox Church and the Oriental Orthodox Church. The Oriental Orthodox Church is made out of 6 churches: the Coptic, the Ethiopian, the Eritrean, the Syrian, the Malankara Indian, and the Armenian Apostolic churches. And these churches are in communion with one another, which means what? That if an Armenian Orthodox walks into our church right off the street, even if he doesn't recognize our liturgy, if we don't dress in the same way as his clergy dresses, if we don't have the same rules of fasting, regardless of all of this, if he walks into our church, without any question, we give him communion. If one of the children of the Coptic Orthodox Church wants to get married, and their spouse, their future spouse, is Armenian Orthodox, Ethiopian Orthodox, Eritrean Orthodox, no questions asked, we marry them. We are in communion. Okay? And among these 6 churches, they consider the Pope of Alexandria, the Patriarch of Alexandria, to be their first among equals. So all of them will venerate and honor Pope Tawadros II as the first among equals in their own right. So what happens after Chalcedon? People were not happy. People were really not happy because unfortunately what ends up happening is that after you get rid of Dioscorus, they sent their own Patriarch of Alexandria. Like, we got rid of him, we're going to place a real Orthodox person in his place. Egyptians being Egyptians, right? And we're amazing at what? Revolutions and chaos, right? This is what we're good at, right? They rebelled. The guy didn't last a day. He came in and they're trying to honor him, and they like almost burnt the church down. He's like, no, there's nobody but Dioscorus, right? And so until today, what do we have in Egypt? We have the Coptic Orthodox Patriarch, and we also have the Melkite Orthodox Patriarch, who is the Greek Orthodox. And he's funny because his name is also Theodoros. So it's Tawadros and Theodoros, both of them are named Theodore, right? And they're in excellent relationships. They claim to be the only Orthodox. We claim to be the only Orthodox. So what happens? In the years that follow, many attempts were made. Emperors tried to reconcile us. One of the emperors is called Justinian, and Justinian, he does really big efforts. He's like, guys, like, you guys are the same, you argued over some nonsense, like, khalas, like, let's get this done with, and this is within a very short period of time, right? And there's like, okay, let's sit down, let's discuss, let's do this, let's do that, but here's one of the problems, okay? At the Council of Chalcedon, there's a canon that comes forth. And the canon that is introduced by the church says what? From here on in, Constantinople is equal to Rome. This is one of the decisions of the Council of Chalcedon. So Justinian says, yalla guys, kiss and make up. So the Oriental Orthodox say what? Okay, perfect, no problem. But we have to agree what happened in Chalcedon can't stick. This whole idea of our Pope Dioscorus being deposed, and here's what's worse. Remember how I told you in Ephesus II, they excommunicated 3 guys from Antioch, Theodorus, Theodoret, and Ibas of Edessa? For some reason at Chalcedon, they reinstated them. They put them back and no, these guys are good. Dioscorus is bad. And these are guys who all spoke against Cyril of Alexandria and who were Nestorian. Okay? You fast forward a little bit and they have another ecumenical council in the 5th century where they go back and they say, Theodoret and Theodore and Ibas are heretics. So it's really confusing. Dioscorus excommunicates them. They're like, no, Dioscorus is the heretic, so bring them back. We bring them back and they're like, no, they're bad. So all of this is happening. So everyone's like, okay, let's kiss and make up, like this is not making any sense. And everyone is in agreement, let's do this. But then Constantinople steps up and says, okay, listen, we don't mind, let's cancel all of the Council of Chalcedon with the exception of the canon. The canon that says that we are equal to Rome. Everything else can drop, but this is... And so people see the power struggle and humanity kicks in and our weakness kicks in and then we get into more fights and it's... So Justinian tries to say, okay, listen, we clearly all believe in the same stuff. How can we prove this? Bring me some of your monks. You bring me some of your monks. Let's write a hymn together that will declare our faith. And they write in the 6th century, they write the hymn, O Only Begotten Son, which we sing every Good Friday, which is the hymn of Homogenes. Right? And until today, in the Eastern Orthodox Church, they sing it every liturgy. The same words that declare our faith of who Jesus is and who Mary is, okay, which we sing every Good Friday. They also sing, we have the same faith. The problem is that today we know this. And when we were hoping for reconciliation, what came in really hard? Islam. And when Islam kicked in the 7th century, a lot of these countries were completely isolated from one another. And there's a lot of ugliness that happened. There was a lot of persecution. If you were considered non-Chalcedonian and you didn't believe in the tomb of Leo, you were persecuted and beaten and imprisonment. You guys ever heard of Saint Samuel the Confessor? Saint Samuel the Confessor is a person who, when he was told, sign the tome of Leo, he took it and tore it. He's like, I'm not signing this. Right? The soldiers took him, they dulu ala, right? And they beat him up so hard that they actually plucked out one of his eyes. Right? So now here we have a church that's saying what? They were the reason for Dioscorus, they hurt Samuel the Confessor, they've killed many people, this and that, and you want us to go back and shake hands? Pride got in the way. And while we can't figure things out between us, big brother Islam walks into Egypt, right? And suddenly, we go back into survival mode. Talking about hymns and theology and ecumenical councils, how about we just make sure our kids don't die? And so we get separated for I don't know how many years. But here's what's beautiful. Despite all of this, where are we today? Now obviously, you fast forward like 5 centuries, and then in the 11th century, there's the Great Schism. Rome and Constantinople get into this big fight, and next thing you know, now Rome is on its own, the Eastern Orthodox are on their own, and the Oriental are fighting for survival. Okay? Lately, we've done tremendous strides. We've had several meetings of reconciliation where we tried to have communication between us. So, for instance, Denmark in August 64, England in 67, Switzerland in 70, Ethiopia in 71, and then Switzerland in 1990. And when we met in 1990 in Geneva, this was a beautiful gathering because at this gathering, you had 14 churches from the Eastern Orthodox and all 6 churches from the Oriental Orthodox sit down at the table with the representatives. And what really clicked for everyone is when they found out that the Coptic Orthodox Church uses the word Theotokos. Like, you guys use Theotokos? We're like, we're the Church of Cyril, dude. Obviously we use Theotokos. Like, so you believe that the person that she gave birth to is God? Yes, of course, God incarnate, the Word of God, Jesus Christ. What are you talking about? Of course. They're like, okay, so what do you believe? We believe he's of 2 natures, but he's not 2 persons. We're like, yeah, that's what we believe. Like, high fives. We're good. We're great. So they come up with a common declaration. It had 10 points. And this is point number 9, which I think is really beautiful. Point number 9 says the following. In the light of the agreed statement on Christology, as well as the above common affirmations, we have now clearly understood that both families, Eastern and Oriental, have always loyally maintained the same authentic Orthodox Christological faith and the unbroken continuity of the apostolic tradition, though they may have used Christological terms in different ways. It is this common faith and continuous loyalty to the apostolic tradition that should be the basis of our unity and communion. Tears and hugs and joyous cheers and wonderful, everyone signs. Until a few people from the East find out and they're like, to hell with all of you. All of you who signed. All of you are heretics. Among them were some very passionate people from this great mountain in Greece called Athos. Okay? And the monks of Athos basically said, they're Monophysite, they're liars. That's what they are. So unfortunately, even though we have this document signed by all 20 families, 14 and 6, nothing really happened. Nothing really happened. So what happened? Because of this, we were hoping, and Baba Shenouda was very wise at the time. In 1990, he said, the only way for this to be confirmed is you guys choose a place. Let's all gather together. Let's all stand in front of an altar. Let's all take communion together. And at the altar, all of us should declare that the anathemas are lifted. What does it mean the anathemas are lifted? That the people we call heretics on your side, we will say we declare them to be non-heretical. And the people that you called heretical on our side, in front of the altar, right before we take communion, you also say we declare them to be righteous and not heretic. And then when Athos and all these other Easterners got involved, unfortunately, the liturgy never happened. Okay? So today, what happens? Today, the common agreement between us is that even though we're not in communion together, we really do recognize that we're Christian. Which might not sound like a lot, but you have to believe me, this is a big deal compared to the drama that we had in history. Where we look at each other and we say, no, we clearly have the same faith. We clearly recognize each other's orthodoxy. We clearly recognize that both churches are producing saints. That there's miracles happening in both sides of the churches. While we have extreme people in each family, we have people on the Coptic side who say they're heretics. They're the ones who killed Dioscorus and Samuel the Confessor. And we have people on their side who are saying they're Monophysite, they're liars, don't believe a thing they say, they're just a spawn of Satan. Right? So there's extremes on both sides. But I want to give you a beautiful example. When I was researching this, I was listening to a sermon by a Greek Orthodox priest who said, my local bishop, he's from Pennsylvania. The Greek Orthodox priest said, my local bishop told us, if a Coptic person comes into your church and wants to take communion, give him communion. If one of your people wants to marry a Coptic person, marry them. While we might not be fully in communion on paper, we recognize each other's value. The same thing happens in the city of Ottawa. Where in the city of Ottawa, truly, we have priests who recognize each other's priesthood, who recognize each other's baptisms. If a Greek Orthodox person walks into our church tomorrow morning, I'm not going to tell them I have to rebaptize you. Tell them as long as you confess that we're not heretics, that what you're saying Amen to, that Amen is said towards a faith that is righteous. As long as you believe that, of course, come, commune. So we are actually much closer to union with the Eastern Orthodox than what we discussed with Amir, with all the politics and all the issues that we have in regard to doctrine with the Western Church, the Catholic brothers and sisters. So all of this is happening. At the end of the day, I think the message that I want to give you is that while there may be a period of time that is tainted with ugliness in history, it's important for us to know it. Because if we know it, we can understand how we got here. Right? Everyone thinks they're doing the best that they can for their faith. Everyone thinks that they're defending their faith in the best way possible. And today, thank God, God has clearly been working with His Holy Spirit in all of the churches so that we can recognize that all of us know who Christ is and that all of us are capable of declaring that we are willing to offer our lives to Him. To God be all glory, now and forever and unto 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 glory.